Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if nationalist China won. Nowadays, nationalist China is also known as Taiwan. Taiwan is an island, but it is also known as the Republic of China, or as we also can call it, Nationalist China. The nationalists, they were all united under one banner, the banner of the Kuomintang. The Kuomintang party had several inspirations, and one of the inspiration they got was of socialism. They even got an initial warm reception of the likes of Stalin, for instance. So if we would butterfly away communism and socialism, this would also butterfly away the Kuomintang, also nationalist China. We have to understand that the Kuomintang wasn't a unified party, but that there were multiple and different factions. You had the militarists, you had a left-wing faction, and different and various right-wing and conservative factions. Monarchists in there, they didn't really count. During the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, the militarists were the most dominant faction. The Kuomintang had for a long time control over many parts of China, but not of all the parts of China. At least they had control over the most important parts of it. But they were in a constant warfare. There was still a civil war going on. Then you had the Japanese invasion. Of course, this was World War II. And well, the civil war continued after World War II. The Kuomintang had then to escape to Taiwan, and the issue never resolved. Technically, the Kuomintang never really lost. And the Communist Party of China never technically totally won. But of course, we understand how the nationalist Chinese, they lost and how the communists, they won, quote unquote. Nowadays, people think of Taiwan as the democratic version of China, what a democratic China could have become if it were to go nationalist, but it wasn't always the case. The Kuomintang had under Chiang Kai-shek dictatorial policies in place. He was even seen as a leader of a major Allied power during World War II and participated in the Cairo conference, so there was also a big ego in the play. And at home he led several policies which got many political opponents killed and jailed. He even continued with his policies in Taiwan, which became known as the period of the White Terror. Although the Kuomintang is considered anti-communist, the Kuomintang, they got a lot of support from Stalin, out of all people. Moscow even had portraits of Chiang Kai-shek, and he was even called the Red General, something that seems very contradictory. Nowadays, we aren't too sure why this happened, but one explanation could be that Stalin preferred a weak China and that he supported both sides in a way at given times in order to destabilize China as a whole. Much of the military staff from the Kuomintang was trained by the Soviets, but even that wasn't enough to beat the communists led by Mao. What if all of that changed? What if nationalist China won? When I say nationalist China won, I mean that we get a situation where the nationalists are the most dominant force in almost all of China. And here are a few points of divergence we can take. One point of divergence would be that Chiang Kai-shek doesn't break with Soviet advisors, but we could get a few issues with that down the road. He could be more cunning about blocking other parties' influences without being overt about it. However, there are also chances that the whole structure would be infiltrated by spies and whatnot, and as a result, Chiang Kai-shek would then be killed or removed and a new different civil war could happen. So this point of divergence may work, but it's also very likely that it won't work. A better point of divergence is that Chiang Kai-shek eliminates the communists in 1934. There wouldn't be the long march of the communists and they would just be killed. But even that would change too many things at once and perhaps even alter the war against Japan and World War II as a whole. So this is not really a good point of divergence we could take. The best point of divergence we can find that doesn't really affect other countries that much would be a point of divergence based on Manchuria. After World War II, the remaining Japanese soldiers in Manchuria would surrender to the Kuomintang and not the communists. This would be very good for Kuomintang and it would leave most of Kuomintang with control over almost all of China. But then we have the Soviets. And so with the Soviets, I think that this wouldn't be possible. So instead, we could have an agreement that the Soviets would control and occupy Manchuria together with the Chinese Communist Party. The Soviets would ask Mao not to pass a certain border, and the US and USSR would somehow agree between each other that Manchuria would be something independent. And as a result, the Soviets get two puppet states in East Asia. Not only North Korea, but also Manchuria. Now, Chiang Kai-shek would probably hate that and protest against it, but the US would not side with him in a war, and China was already totally destroyed by the Japanese and the ongoing civil war. Mao too would have a difficult time accepting it, and Stalin may order his removal because, both leaders had a huge ego and we all know where that goes. Instead, Chiang Kai-shek would focus his energy and army to re-annex and control certain parts, especially in the west, such as Jiangxing and Tibet. But this time around, the Dalai Lama would stay in Tibet, and the Uyghur people, as well as the Tibetans, they would not really get that huge of a pressure to assimilate and give up their culture. Perhaps there would be some issues with religions, but it wouldn't be on the same scale as with the People's Republic of China. Moreover, the Cultural Revolution would also not happen, and Nationalist China would perhaps even get a little bit of support and help from the US, which would put Nationalist China in a more comfortable position than the People's Republic. A first big challenge will be the Korean War. Kim Il-sung would still invade the south, and Manchuria would probably support him as well. Stalin would not intervene, but I could see Chiang Kai-shek intervening in South Korea at least. The US would urge him not to attack Manchuria as it may lead to World War III, and the Soviets had the nuclear bomb. Soldiers of Nationalist China would be sent to South Korea and in order to help South Korea to survive, and we would get a similar deal as in OTL where North and South would both still exist and nobody really wanted to challenge the balance. But we would see a Soviet reaction in removing Kim Il-sung and placing someone more obedient in there. The Soviets, they can just not allow it that suddenly some of their puppet states, they go crazy, right? They had to have control over there, and perhaps some more soldiers of the Red Army would also be well placed in there. This has some consequences. First of all of Nationalist China would still be close. This has some consequences. First of all, Nationalist China would, at the beginning, still be very close to the West, but slowly and surely drift apart. I don't think they would join the non-allied movement, but they would come pretty close to it. Chiang Kai-shek would, after some time, gain confidence, and he would think that the US had not always the best interest in their heart. Internal policies would become a bit more liberal, but we would never get a true democracy. Reunification this time with Manchuria would be one of the main topics instead of reunification with Taiwan. And we would not get this whole issue of one China and two systems. The communists, they would also be more obedient in Manchuria, to the Soviets, of course, just like in North Korea, and we would not have any Kim Il-sung dynasty in there. This will then lead to the second consequence. It is highly likely that the countries would even join the Warsaw Pact and be integrated in the whole Soviet and the Eastern Bloc system. China may not join the NATO, and this leads us to the third consequence. The US would still see South Korea and Japan as important allies, but they would have no hold whatsoever over Taiwan. In fact, China could become a wild card for both sides, and after the death of Stalin, Khrushchev could then try to woo over Chiang Kai-shek, same for the West, and we would get some flip-flopping going on in there. Problems with India, they would still exist no matter under which government, be it left-wing or right-wing, but this time around the Indians could be seen in a more negative light in the Western world due to the fact that they had more left-wing sympathies. They wouldn't go full-blown communist, but they would also flip-flop as well, depending on which side China would stand on. China's industrialization would not advance as fast as in OTL, but they would have a more comfortable position in the beginning, but this comfortable position would then, just stagnate in a way as compared to the People's Republic. The army, it would still be very impressive nonetheless. As for Vietnam, I don't believe that the communists would win in there, because China would not let the communists retreat on Chinese soil, of course. And the intervention in Vietnam of the US will be a victory, leading to a much higher popularity of Nixon, and perhaps even a third term for him and not a resignation, which would dramatically change the political landscape of the US. This would also have another consequence. The US would be more motivated to intervene directly in several places and even more openly, which would also challenge the USSR. A potential clash of interests would also happen in Afghanistan, where not only the USSR would have interests, but also China. They would perhaps even support the government that existed before the communist coup, leading to a proxy war between both parties. The US may, in this timeline, not even support the Taliban, because China would already be there, and perhaps they would then try to win China over to their side. With the death of Chiang Kai-shek and the collapse of the USSR, another leader would be faced with one big question. Should China be isolationist or not? Due to the less rapid industrialization and no demographic and agricultural ruptures, because of no cultural revolution, China may not even have the need to make deals with Russia for resources and whatnot. Thus, the future of this nationalist China remains a mystery. And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.